Hi, I'm Katie Crane, and this is the very first episode of the Pilates Lounge. Now, I have decided to bring the Pilates Lounge to you because I truly believe that Pilates has the potential to change lives. I'm committed to supporting you, our listeners, in your journey to make a positive impact, both in your own life and in the lives of the people that you serve, probably your clients. So the Pilates Lounge podcast is specifically for Pilates professionals, for people who love movement, who are committed to the Pilates industry, and to movement educators worldwide. So thank you for joining me. And I know that you will benefit greatly from listening to these podcasts so that we can delve in really deep into all things movement, all things body, and many things in the health arena so that we can better serve our own community. Now, today's episode, I'm going to delve into the first 4 Pilates principles. Now, there are 6 Pilates principles that we all live by as Pilates professionals. And so I've broken these principles down into 3 separate episodes so that they're easily digestible chunks that you can listen to when you've got about 30 minutes of your time. So the first 4 principles that we're going to be delving into today are centering, concentration, control, and precision. So why don't you sit back, relax, grab a juice or your preferred drink wherever you are, and let's get straight into the first episode of the Pilates Lounge. Today we're going to be talking through the essence of Pilates, the principles that drive our practice, and the wisdom of Joseph Pilates and his students. Now we're going to kick off things exploring the core philosophy of Joe Pilates. His work was built upon just 3 fundamental principles. Those were breath, whole body health, and whole body commitment, encompassing the mind, body, and spirit. So these principles are the foundations of everything that we do in Pilates. But over the years, there have been 6 common principles that most Pilates schools adhere to. I found it really difficult trying to figure out who actually wrote these core principles, but from looking at many different schools, it's definitely apparent that most of us are adhering to these 6 basic principles, the fundamentals of Pilates. Now, on my research, I did read that Mary Bowen, who was one of Joe and Clara's original students, she recalls Joe emphasizing the most important principles of the work was actually the whole body. So that is definitely a reminder that Pilates is not just about your physical core. It's actually about connecting your innermost self from your feet to the crown of your head and everything in between. So when I was first introduced to the 6 core principles of Pilates, it was when I initially did my Pilates teacher training, which is probably something that most of us experience. And when I looked at those 6 Pilates principles, I thought, oh yeah, they make sense. It's something that I can build my teaching on. And one of my personal mentors, I remember them saying, you must always come back to the principles in your teaching. And so that's definitely what I've done over the years. But what's also happened as my teaching has evolved is my understanding and my appreciation of these principles has also evolved and developed. And I've really found that honoring the principles has been super important for my teaching, but also having a deeper understanding or allowing for those principles to evolve while I evolve has been really, really encouraging and important for my teaching, both of my own body, my understanding of my own body, but for the experience of my clients. So, I'm going to talk about the 6 basic or foundational principles of Pilates that are commonly recognized. You may find that the school that you're taught by might use slightly different words, but the concepts remain the same. And there are definitely schools out there that have more than just 6 principles, and that is totally fine. But these 6 are definitely tend to be kind of weaving through most schools that I looked at before I'm speaking to you. So when I was writing this podcast. So the first principle is centering. And, when I was first introduced to the principle of centering, I thought that it was pretty cut and dry what that meant. Obviously, it's all about our core, right? Because when I first started Pilates, I assumed that the most important part of the body that we should be working was the abdominals. It was that core structure. So much of my teaching, so many of my cues was based around cueing the core. But over the years, I've come to recognize that it's so much more than that. And in fact, even though so many people come into the studio, and if I asked a lot of people that come in, what is it that you're here for? One of the first things I often say is, I need to strengthen my core, or I've got a weak core. But now I wonder if they really know what they're saying, or if they really understand what the core is, and is that definitely what they need? What I've realized over the years is quite often it's not necessarily people's core that is the problem. It might be that they're actually too active in parts of the body, or they're underactive in other parts, or it may actually be that they're performing movements over and over again throughout the day that is impeding their whole body experience, which really is what Joseph Pilates meant or was alluding to when he spoke about the core. So, centering to me now is partly about those deep core muscles. Of course, that's going to happen. Those muscles are going to be working once your body is functioning well in all movement. And as a Pilates practitioner or even a Pilates enthusiast, you may well understand that the core structure includes things like transverse abdominals, pelvic floor, multifidi. We could even go and look at the psoas, the rectus abs, the obliques. That's all part of the core. But what about being centered and being present and feeling the movement from the very core of your being? So, what is the center of our being? Well, to me, Pilates is very much about consciousness. And so the phrase the center of consciousness simply means that core of our being, which we each intuit as being our deepest true nature. And if we are completely in the moment, if we are completely centered within ourselves, then we can work from a better state of consciousness. So, of course, I looked up the meaning of consciousness, and consciousness in psychology it's a particular kind of awareness. So it concerns who we are, where we are in the moment, and what we know in the deepest dimension of our being. And to me, that is the very essence of Pilates when we practice. If we really adhere to all 6 principles, which we'll get to, then centering is a very big part of that. I cannot tell you how much more aware I have become of myself as a person, of my emotions, of my physical self, of my deeper understanding of my body in space, but also a greater awareness of everything around me. All of that has happened just by doing the work. All of that happens just by getting on a machine over and over again, or getting on the mat and performing the exercises over and over again. So this state of consciousness is similar to the Buddhist concept of mindfulness, which is described as keeping one's consciousness alive to present reality. So if we go back and look at Joseph's Pilates ideal, the whole body, the breath, whole body health, whole body commitment, encompassing the mind, body, and spirit, then I believe that centering is very much a part of bringing the soul and the spirit and the self, or whatever name that you want to use that, into the work that we're doing. So, yes, absolutely. Of course, centering is the core, but it is also the very essence of the work that we are performing in our own body and that our clients are performing. And I believe that it's really once we are centered, it's once we are truly there, present in the moment, that the magic happens. The next principle, concentration. So, concentration involves focusing your mind on each movement so that all movements are done with full awareness and knowledge of what you're doing. This really allows for improved body control throughout every single exercise. Now, concentration takes focus and it cannot be embodied with chit chat. So, if I'm teaching a group class and a couple of friends come along and they're constantly talking to each other throughout the class, then in my mind, they're not concentrating. So they are not performing Pilates. Now, while I love creating a communal space in studio, so people don't just come for Pilates, we all understand that. What we really are creating is a community. And of course, before the class, after the class, let's chit chat, let's get to know each other, let's create a social environment that makes people want to continue to come back time and time again. But when you get on your machine or when you get on the mat, you absolutely must cease talking, focus on the body, concentrate on what it is that you're doing. And when we concentrate, then we can find peace and quiet within the body. Now, as well as chit chat, that may also include loud music. So, what if you're playing music in the studio? What type of music are you playing? Because if you're playing music where everybody's singing along, or the music is louder than the instructor is able to speak, or the music is more of a focus than the instruction, there's no ways that people can be concentrating. I was listening to a Huberman podcast last week. If you don't know Huberman, Andrew Huberman, it's such a great podcast. So he's a neuroscientist and he was speaking about optimizing your concentration. So being able to really perform at a high level, really get stuff done. And I forget the statistics, but he was saying that if you're going to listen to music, it should not be taking over what you're doing. And in fact, it's instrumental music that allows us to still remain focused or to concentrate. So music with lyrics, if you're singing along or if you're listening to the lyrics, then your mind has been broken to perform that task. Whereas if you've got some instrumental music in the background, then you're much better able to focus. There is actually, I forget what it is, and I should have looked at it before I started, but and I'll pop it in the show notes, but there is a very specific music that was studied to help people focus and concentrate, and it showed to increase their brain's ability or their function as far as that is concerned. And I did take time to listen to the music when I heard about that study. And it was basically really gentle, instrumental kind of stuff. It was something that it's not like your whole body embodied the music. It was just there in the background. So it is super important if we want our clients to be able to focus on what they're doing, that we create an environment that encourages that part of the work. And even so, if we look at what our average attention span is these days, did you know that the year 2000, it was estimated that our average attention span was like 15 seconds. Well, you know what it is now? It's 8.25 seconds. So it's just about halved in the last 2 decades. And get this, goldfish have an average attention span of 9 seconds. So a goldfish can actually concentrate or have better attention span for longer than what we can now. So I remember when I was growing up and, it was like a joke, oh, he's got the attention span of a goldfish, just swims around and around in a goldfish bowl. But here we are, the majority of people have a shorter attention span than a goldfish. And part of that, of course, I'm sure I don't need to tell you, is the use of mobile devices. The use of mobile devices has really messed with our ability to concentrate because there's just this constant flow of information. If you looked at something like Instagram, like some social media, and there's that scrolling tendency, well, we are finding it harder and harder to look at long text, to really focus on one thing at a time. And part of that, of course, is the neurotransmitters that are working in our body. So we get like this hit of dopamine, when we're scrolling on the phone, and it's like a reward system. So our brain and our body starts to crave that reward system. So if we can create an environment where people can come back to that concentration. And thinking of that is a personal bugbear of mine is, those phones that you can get on your watch, like the Apple smartwatch and stuff. And you see people looking at their wristwatch when they're halfway through a class, but really they're just deleting a message or they're swiping away a message or they're not answering a phone call or whatever it may be. That's part of that disintegration of our focus as well. So if we can encourage our clients to come into the studio, take those damn watches off, or at least put them on silent so you're not getting those notifications all the time. Put your phone over in the locker and put your phone on silent. It's an hour of your time that is so important that if you're not able to concentrate, it's very simple. You're not performing Pilates. And that leads us on to the third principle of Pilates, control. So control, of course, could be all about keeping your movement slow and steady while maintaining proper posture and using all the available muscles to complete the movement. So if we're performing faster movements, they should still look controlled. There's nothing worse than, especially if you're teaching like a group class, say you're teaching a reformer class and you've got a few people in that class, there's nothing worse than looking around the class and most of the people have no control over their body. They've got no control over the machine. The machine is coming back to the stopper and it's hitting the stopper every time, or you can hear the ropes jangling around when they're doing things. That's a lack of control. So it's so important that good movement looks good. So I'm a surfing fan. So for me, I always compare this to watching a professional surfer out there in the surf. They make that look absolutely breezy easy. It's like they're not even putting any effort into what it is that they're doing. But that doesn't just happen just by getting out there and paddling the waves and getting on the waves and actually surfing. Those beautiful movements, they happen from performing very controlled exercises over and over again and making sure that you're doing things just right. Now, what I'm looking for in a class is that my class are moving mindfully. So if we move mindfully, then there's no quick jerky movements, right? And those quick jerky movements really is what results in injuries or other issues, and that's due to improper form. Now, one of the reasons that I want to speak about this and for the next principle as well is on social media, I see quite a few people saying things like, it doesn't matter how you move. It just matters that you're moving. Now, of course, there's always two sides to an argument. So movement is better than not moving. Absolutely. So if you're somebody who is sedentary and you're not doing much exercise, by all means, doing something is better than doing nothing. But when you come into a Pilates class, let's remember it was called contrology. So if you want to call what you're doing Pilates, which is just the namesake of the great Joe Pilates, you must still be adhering to the original work that was intended. which is control. So if you're not teaching your clients, your students, how to properly control the machine in and out, how to correctly control their body through movement, and if everybody's just doing ad hoc, whatever, and that movement is looking ugly, that is not control. And so that is not Pilates. Now, control of the body is inherently married to the control of one's mind. So, if we are encouraging our clients and our own body to do things with good control, good restraint, to be committed and disciplined the way that we move, then the benefits are far reaching to the mind and the body. So, if you lack control, then potentially you are somebody who would drink too much alcohol at a party, or you go to a buffet restaurant and you keep going and filling up your plate despite that your body has told you that you don't need any more food for nourishment. Or if you have an argument with a loved one, you just continue to yell and scream and cry and cause a scene. Those are aspects of lacking control. So the mind and the body is inherently married. There is no one without the other. So if we can teach our clients and our students how to control their body, then invariably that is going to help them control their mind, control any aspects of poor habits, and help them control other lifestyle traits that are going to encourage them to be better than what they were when they first started with us. So let's never forget that all of these principles, they end up weaving into every single part of our life. Whatever we are teaching in the studio becomes a part of the outside world. So the next principle is very much married to the principle of control. I believe that it goes even deeper. The principle, of course, is precision. So while control is about getting everything just right, I think of precision is almost about adding sparkle onto what it is that we're doing. So precision is about making sure that each movement is executed correctly and with purpose. So every exercise should be done with intentionality so that it is done properly without sacrificing technique or form. Of course, precision can be obtained by breaking down those complex movements until they are done properly and then bringing them back together to create the full symphony of the exercise. I think that the perfect example of precision is the rowing series. And in particular, one of the rowing exercises that I always break down over and over again before we go through the whole sequence is into the sternum. So I make sure that my students are getting each part of that exercise just right, because if you think about that exercise, rowing into the sternum, there are portions of the exercise where the carriage should be moving, but then there are portions of the exercise very specifically where the carriage must stay still. So that is really marrying control and precision. You've got to be very precise in where your body is moving and where your body is at to make sure that you can perform each part of that sequence exactly correctly so that you are in fact able to keep the carriage still and allow for the carriage to move at the right moment. And when that happens, like, do you remember when you really nailed that particular exercise? Or maybe there's another exercise that you really had to break down to make it flow perfectly, to make it look just beautiful. Well, it's really breaking down and being very precise in each step that allows our body and our mind, of course, to absolutely embody that exercise in its entirety. So I said before, being precise really adds sparkle to what you do. It will make what you're doing stand out in the crowd, both as a teacher and as a mover. Being precise, it means that you have an eye for detail. And in Pilates, it's really the small things that make all the difference. That's where the magic lays. And that's what makes Pilates stand out from other modes of exercise, it's because of the precision. It's because of just that rotation at the right point, just pressing into the strap, maybe with the pinky finger rather than the flat hand, that gets the correct muscle working. So if you imagine in your mind's eye the most beautiful, luxurious hotel you have ever stayed at, or the most beautiful high-end boutique store that you've ever been into. You know, when I grew up, there were two main shopping giants. Those were David Jones and Myer, and they were both in the same strip mall. And as a teenager, we would hang out at Myers because that's where all of our teenage clothes were. You know, it was kind of a fun place to be. But if you stepped into David Jones, you really felt like you were stepping into a completely different world. And I always think of the food courts in particular. You know, in Myers, the food court would be like the Chinese takeaway, McDonald's, Hungry Jack's, you know, all the big name fast food places, and maybe a couple of little daggy cafes, you know, just selling sandwiches. But then you'd go across to David Jones and they would have these most beautifully presented and wrapped individual desserts, and they'd be lined up so precisely, everything just perfectly in line, all of the colors just matching so beautifully. And these were just single desserts that you could buy. And I remember going in there as a teenager and just feeling like I had been transported into a completely different world. And those desserts would be so much more expensive than the McDonald's soft serve ice cream, but I would always go into David Jones and just choose something. And it wasn't just the desserts, it was even the pâtés and the dips and the baguettes and the breads. Everything is presented and visually merchandised with such precision that it looks perfect. And that's what I always think about when I think about the sparkle that being precise can really offer us. So it's that feeling of making you want to spend the time or the money because it's so worth the end result. So precision in Pilates, it absolutely is where the magic happens. It's like the perfect bow on a gift that's wrapped. It's the shine of a brand new car. It's the finishing touches of that luxurious hotel suite. That is one of the biggest differences in Pilates, as well as with control, that allows the work that we do not only stand out from every other modality of exercise and movement, but also that's where the magic happens for our clients. Well, that's a wrap, folks. Our first episode together of the Pilates Lounge. Thanks so much for joining me. Now, remember that episode 2 is going to be continuing on from this first episode. So we're going to be speaking about the next Pilates principle. And remember that the Pilates principles are something that we learn at the very beginning of our Pilates professional journey. It's something that all of my students learn in their Reformer mentoring program. And it's something that we must keep coming back to as Pilates professionals. So if you need to rehash, go back to the principles, or you have a student that has not learned the principles, because believe it or not, there are schools out there that do not teach this, then check out my website, thepilatesprofessional.com.au. That's THEPILATESPROFESSIONAL.com.au. You can either check out my 6-month mentoring program to become a Reformer instructor, and that program is recognized by the Pilates Association of Australia. It's a nationally recognized and recommended program. Or you could check out one of my short workshops that will be going over the Pilates principles. Thanks again for joining me. I'm Katie Crane, and this is the Pilates Lounge.